I am Brenda Barbour, the manager of IEG's Knowledge Management and Communications Unit. And welcome to the second in our series of COVID-19 knowledge sharing sessions for evaluators. We had our first session with IEG evaluators sharing their knowledge, and today we're happy to welcome evaluation colleagues from the African Development Bank and the Asian Development Bank to share their experiences. COVID-19 has created an unprecedented environment, and in this new context, it's really important for us all to share lessons from our work and learn from each other's experiences. So we'll start hearing from our guests, but throughout, we also want to hear from everyone online. So how have your experiences been similar or different from what we're hearing from the AFDB and ADB? And what else do we need to learn? So at any time, you can type a comment or a question into the chat or raise your hand, and Bahar Salamova, who's online with me, will help me keep track of who wants to come in. So let me start by introducing you to who we have. From the African Development Bank Evaluation Department, we have Clement Bance, Principal Evaluation Officer, and Samson Waitahusu, also an evaluation officer with the African Development Bank. Welcome, Clement and Samson.
Thank you.
From the Asian Development Bank Evaluation Department, we have Joanne Asquith, Principal Evaluation Specialist, and Tomo Ueda, Principal Evaluation Specialist. Welcome, Samson and Tomo.
Hi.
We also have with us Karen Rott, who's a frequent collaborator with IEG, especially with our work with our CLEAR centers, and she will be available to share her insights from her role as the Division Manager of African Development Bank's Knowledge Management, Outreach, and Capacity Development Unit. And we have Jose Carbajo, who's the Director of IEG's Financial, Private Sector, and Sustainable Development Evaluation Department, who will be here to give us closing remarks. Welcome to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. We're going to get started right away, and we're going to start with Joanne, Tomo, Samson, and Clement. And I want to ask, sort of at the beginning stages of preparing for an evaluation, when you were doing this and you knew that you were not going to be able to travel, what did your work focus on? What were your goals and assumptions in the planning stage? And let me open that question up and ask, would someone from the African Development Bank want to take it first?
Mm-hmm.
Samson or Clement?
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes. So thank you very much. Yes, as you said, I would like to share my experience of remote evaluation that we performed in 2015 during our the African Development Bank country strategy and program evaluation in Burundi. So as a reminder, in 2015, 2015, we were of election. 2015 were a year of election in Burundi. So I would like to clarify that conducting a remote evaluation was not our initial goal. We did so because the country's security situation deteriorated during the evaluation process. Therefore, it was no longer for us to carry out the data collection mission as planned. However, before that, we were able to carry out our scoping mission in Bujumbura in April 2015, just before the election, which was initially scheduled in June and then postponed to July 2015. So in overall, the scoping mission went well and allow us to present and explain the objective of the evaluation to the main stakeholders and collect the available data. So our first action to take was an inventory of the available data in order to identify the missing information by sector of intervention of the bank. So the objective for us was to see if it was possible to collect them remotely. One of our concern was to have multi sources of information by sector so that we could triangulate our information in order to not compromise the credibility of the evaluation funding. So the other aspect was to define a strategy for remote data collection and to identify the most appropriate tools to collect those data. I think that we will discuss this in the following step on this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Clement. And then let me also turn to Joanne or Tomu and hear from you guys, from either of you or both of you, about the planning stages and what are the things that you had to think about and think differently about.
I can speak for a little while. So I won't go into the details of what I'm going to say about the whole experience, but we didn't expect to have to do a virtual mission. We were planning to visit Dhaka in Bangladesh. So I would say that there was no time for thinking differently. We just, 1 minute were going to do a mission and the next minute it was all online. So we learned by doing rather than planning. Really, I would say there was no time to plan at all.
So did you stick with your same schedule? I mean, you had to change.
We stuck to our schedule. Yes, we did. We did, and we learned from that.
Very good. And Tomu or Samson, did you want to add anything before we get into then what happened? The next question is going to be about what you did to collect the data, but is there anything else that you want to add related to the planning stages?
Yeah.
So just to add, in my case, I've done two country partnership strategy final review validation. We call it CPSRP for two countries, Maldives and Mongolia. And the situations were very different in two countries. Maldives had lots of infection cases. This was in March and April. So all the government officials were in a complete lockdown at their homes. So they were sharing their Wi-Fi with their kids at school. And so, you know, everyone was at home and they had very limited data with themselves. And also the connections were very bad. But in the case of Mongolia, the local infection was very small numbers. And almost everyone in the government was commuting to their offices. So I really maximized the use of locally based consultants to go and get data whenever something was not really clear in the interviews and stuff. So it makes a lot of difference when the situations are different, whether government people are at their home or in the offices. So you have to know the local conditions first, I think.
That's a good point. And so for Maldives, when they were working from home and didn't necessarily have all of the documentation that they would normally have, how did you adapt to address those gaps?
So basically, in the case of Maldives, because the portfolio is rather small compared to Mongolia, for example, like Maldives had only like less than 10 active or finished projects or loans, whereas Mongolia had almost about 50. So in the case of Maldives, because of the situation where everybody was at their home, we have to kind of ask questions on the basis of whatever documents that are already available on the website or through ADB colleagues, so that we want to just check on things that are already on the documents. And in the case of Mongolia, because everyone was able to go to their offices, we were able to go further. So you really have to differentiate and how you prioritize, I think. because you cannot really chase after everything when everybody is restricted at their home.
Thank you. I'm going to start this next question with Samson. If you're not speaking, may I ask you to mute? We're having some feedback. So anyone who's not speaking, please mute themselves. So Samson, we've already started to talk about conducting the evaluation and collecting the data. And so I want to start with you and talk about what tools did you select for collecting data? What did you learn as you were doing the evaluation about what works in this environment?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm talking about Gabon country strategy program evaluation, and for the people who don't know where the continent Gabon is located in Central Africa, so it's a small country in terms of population, but classified
Excuse
as,
me, Samson. Excuse me for 1 minute. I apologize for interrupting. We are not hearing you well, and so I'm going to ask participants to turn their video off to see if that will help with the bandwidth, and see if we can hear you a bit better.
Okay.
No, it's fine.
And again, a reminder to everyone to please mute, except for the ones speaking. Okay, Samson, let's try it again.
So, okay. Is it better now? Oh,
Yes,
okay.
it's better, but there's still someone who needs to mute. Hema, I'm going to ask if you, as the host, can mute them. Thank you. Please continue, Samson. Tell us a bit about your evaluation. Tell us what your evaluation was, and then go into what you did to collect the data. Thank you.
Okay, good. So I was saying that our evaluation was the country strategy and program evaluation of Gabon. And Gabon is a small country in terms of population, located in the center of the continent, but classified as a middle-income country. So we started the evaluation in normal process when the lockdown happened, and then we decided we were lucky, we were able to complete the inception report when the situation happened. So we took time to develop alternative approach based on a combination of remote interviews and relying on local consultants for site visits. So for us, in our initial plan, we try to expand more the timing, because for our initial site visit, we planned for 3 weeks. But given the current context of remote interviews, we expanded more, and we planned for 1 month. But we realized that going forward, we were not able to stick to our initial calendar. So initially we planned for 1 month, but finally we end up with 1 month and half.
Well, that's still pretty good. Let me ask you a couple of follow-up. Oh, go ahead.
Yes. In terms of the interviews, I talked about the interviews, but as we progress also, we noticed that we will not be able to conduct all the planned interviews. So what we did, we organized a meeting and we identify a priority list and a less priority list. And then we focus all our efforts on the priority list. That will help us to identify the information gaps, because at the planning stage, at the inception phase, we develop all the required data collection tools around the information gaps. We spend more time for in-depth doc review, and then we identify what information we can collect from the document and all other secondary data sources, and what information we need to collect, what additional information we need to collect. So going forward, we realize that we will not be able to conduct all the interviews so that we focus mostly on our priority list. For the site visits, we developed a comprehensive tool to guide the local consultants. In the portfolio, we had infrastructure and agriculture. For infrastructure, we didn't face a lot of issue. We have a visit for a road project and for core projects. But we face a lot of challenges for agriculture because we were not able to conduct interviews with our initial sample of operatives that we identified from the beginning. So it's one of the challenges that we face, and we rely on the availability of people, and then it's one of the limitations that we are going to. One important thing that we notice is coordination. Coordination is a paramount. In the government, they nominate two people to facilitate to organize the appointment and do the follow-up. But for us also in the evaluation team, we develop a Google Drive collaborative platform to help to circulate the information and to have a collaborative work and easily work on the agenda, the topics to discuss, the meeting notes, and all those things. So
Thank you.
basically, it's what we try to adjust from our side.
Okay, and we'll come back to that because I think that will be a challenge that a lot of evaluators faced, is that they may not be able to get to everyone on their priority list. They identify a number of information gaps, and then they also have to find local consultants. So let me turn to Joanne, and I'd like you to tell us a bit more about your evaluation. And from what you've heard from Samson, are there things similar in how you went about collecting data, and what else did you do to get the data you needed? You're still muted, Joanne. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay, so one of the things that really helped for us was that we had already done a fair amount of desk work before we undertook the virtual mission. So it depends what you mean by data, because a lot of the information from project completion reports and so on, all of that, we had to hand anyway. So the purpose of the mission was to ground truth what we had already found through a series of interviews with mainly, I should say, mainly government officials. And it was, in a way, one of the weaknesses of the virtual mission was not being able to get out of Dakar to have interviews with stakeholders, with beneficiaries. That was not possible to do in the time that we had, and may not have been possible to do anyway because of technical or technological constraints. But we didn't actually look into how possible would it have been to have had interviews with stakeholders who are located outside of Dhaka. So that was a huge constraint, really. And another thing that was missing was spontaneity, because when you're on mission, there are things that you learn that you didn't expect to learn through conversations that you have with people. When you're on mission, there's so much more color, right, in terms of the things that you hear, the kind of conversations that you have with colleagues. All of that was missing, and I don't think that you can really replace that. That kind of local flavor and texture and context that you get from being on the ground.
Thank you. And let me just see if Tomu or Clement want to come in and tell us a bit more about what challenges or surprising benefits you found from having to do this remotely.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, please, yes.
Okay, so in my case, in regular times, for our own ADB own projects, we would really rely on the ADB's project completion reports. But because of the COVID also, and for Mongolia particularly, I did the interviews in June, July, August. And already, because the COVID was creeping in, have started already, and it was really continuing on, the ongoing projects were heavily affected. There were lots of delays, so nothing was really moving. So in a way, we had to really concentrate on some of the projects that are mature or almost completed to get the sense of how countries are, implementing ADB projects. And so one of the ways that I kind of utilized is to try to get the government's own project completion report. In ADB, before ADB embarks on its own completion report, the government has to prepare its own completion report. And based on that, usually ADB does its own completion report. But because of the delays and everything, and unavailability of ADB project completion report, I really went extra miles to collect whatever government's draft completion reports there may be. And so at least there are some written documents coming from the government's own. And sometimes it's not as refined, perhaps, as the ADB's one. And also methodology may be a bit different. But what really I benefited, luckily, was that some of the government's project completion report had very raw beneficiary surveys and stuff. And it wasn't really sanitized yet. It was really in the analysis still. So, it was, as Joanne said, it's very difficult for us to carry out independent evaluation office's own beneficiary survey under these circumstances. But if there's any beneficiary surveys that's already been done by the government, and if it's still not sort of finalized but raw, you could really check, the reliability and accuracy of it. But whatever information you have, you really have to try to use it to the maximum you can. Thank you.
Thanks. That's a great adaptation to go directly to the raw data from the government. Clement, may I ask whether you'd like to come in also?
Okay, thank you. I think that in my case, in terms of Seoul, we mainly use the phone, the video conferencing, and local consultant where needed. So in practical terms, what happened during our evaluation is so the telephone and video conferencing using the infrastructure of the bank country office in Bujumbura to contact our individual and group interviews. And the second point is that in addition to that, we looked for recent evaluation of other development partners. Like for instance, we were able to find a joint evaluation of the European Union, France, and Belgium, joint evaluation on budget support, and governance sector was one of the key sector of intervention of the bank in Burundi. And in addition to that, we're trying to find some seats of institutions specializing on the collecting of and analyzing specific data, like, for instance, still in the sector of governance, we were able to find the public expenditure and financial accountability report. For those who know this kind of report, know that it's a very comprehensive report on the governance, the PFM sector, and so on. And lastly, in the area where the data gap was important, in our case, it was the agriculture sector. Okay, we recruit local consultants to collect and analyze the preliminary data in the field. as you can see, our main constraints was getting the appointments. We have to be patient, and the support of our colleagues from the bank field office in Bujumbura was very helpful on that. So as you can see, the case of Burundi was different from the current context of COVID-19. We were able to have several individual and group virtual interviews, and we were able to have a 3 days virtual workshop to validate our preliminary findings. Thank you.
Thank you. And so before we talk about the sort of results or outcomes of your evaluation, I want to open it up to participants for two things. So everyone online, if you have a question, you can type for our 4 panelists, you can type it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I'll turn to you and let you ask the question. And I also would like to benefit, we have people from 4 institutions online, so benefit from all of that knowledge by asking you to share your experiences, whether you faced similar challenges, took similar approaches, or used a different approach to what you've heard so far. Please either comment that in the chat or raise your hand and we'll let you make that point. Okay, well, we'll go on to our next question, but if anyone wants to come in and, okay, Andy Stone has asked, yes, this is a question I had when Samson was talking about finding local consultants. So to the 4 panelists, did you have networks of local consultants or academics that you were able to tap? Or did the locals also face the same restrictions on travels and meetings? So who would like to answer Andy's question? Thank you, Andy. For those of you who use local consultants, Tom,
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
So I was very lucky because in the case of Mongolia, before even COVID started, I was asking around to my colleagues whether anyone knew about good consultants. And actually, one of my colleagues, Melinda Sutherland, she conducted a project level evaluation in education in Mongolia, and she really recommended me that local consultant. So I hired her. And she turned out to be former resident mission ADB staff who resigned about 3-4 years ago. And so she knew almost everyone in ADB. And also she knew how to use the ADB banner to arrange meetings or follow up with information or data. So in my case, I was really lucky because she's not ADB staff anymore, but she knows the system. And she already knew the evaluation methodology and the importance of sort of neutrality or all these kinds of OECD DAC criteria. So, you know, I was just lucky. But also, I think Joanne and I were talking about this. But as you know, colleague from African Development just said, we used our sort of donor network also. So whenever some of our team members had worked with the Mongolian government in the past or was working for another agencies, we try to triangulate our findings or interview results with those people in the donor community. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful. And Samson, I know you had used local consultants, so let me ask you 2 questions. One, again, how did you identify the local consultants? And then a second question from Jeff Chelsky is on language. Did you have to deal with translations and also any potential conflicts of interest?
Thank you very much. I think in our case, also we were very lucky because we have a preliminary short list of qualified consultants from the initial list that we received when we were selecting the firm for our evaluation. And then we use also the network of development partners to collect the relevant candidate. And but again, the challenge is still there, whether there can be, because usually the local market is not so wide. So usually the local consultants are engaged in previous work in the countries and all those things. But what we did to mitigate that, we have a clear and well developed data collection tool that we discuss with them. We explain what information we need and all those things. So it's what we did to mitigate the risk. But as I said, we were lucky that we have that preliminary short list, and also we use the development partners network to collect additional recommendations. And from there, we identify the two relevant local consultants that help us.
Thank you. So I'm going to first recognize an IEG alumni. Eric Bloom has typed a comment in the chat, and I think it's an interesting point because, you know, we're talking about not being able to go on mission because of the global pandemic, but we've been faced with this situation before in FCV where we aren't able to travel to countries for different reasons. So the things that we learn today about being able to do this may sadly continue to be able to be applied. I want to get to this question because I think it's an interesting one. So any colleagues who've used technological solutions such as mobile phone surveys, anyone online, either of the panelists or elsewhere, would you be willing to share those experiences with us? Okay, well, people are thinking about whether or not they've used technology. I'll go to the next question from Elena Bardassi here in IEG. Did you have to cancel questions or give up on some parts of the analysis because of perceived bias? And if so, how did you make this decision? How did you determine the risk of bias was too large? And Elena, if you want to come in and speak and give us the context of that question, that might also be helpful if you're able to.
No, very quickly. I'm a little worried, in particular about this part. You know, we are trying to simplify analysis, and we are trying to determine where is it that we can give reliable questions, and you know, my criteria would be focus on questions where we can give reliable answers. So I was curious about how to make this decision, if they had to encounter the situation where they figure out that the risk of bias was too large, and therefore it was not a good idea to go there.
Thank you, Elena. And Tomu, is that something that you could take?
Well, yes. Well, it's not that easy. We had a meeting with one of the municipalities in Mongolia, and we had senior officials in that meeting. And so in that particular case, the senior official was quite very critical about the ADB project about the sort of legal framework, the loan agreement assurances, and also the arrangement with the central government. And so, and it was quite strong opinion. And so, you know, it just like normal mission, also we needed to find out from the local consultant or even get back to the country director or the ADB office to see if you know there were different political background. The management of the municipality was from different political parties or that sort of thing. We need to cross-check whether there were those kind of issues behind or whether this was quite genuine issues. So we really have to cross-check with other parties. And also, I think some of the colleagues mentioned about translator in Mongolia. Some of the guest speakers, the interviewees, chose to have interpreter, translator, and we didn't have a translator in our team from our budget. So we had to rely on translator who our country office hires. And so, but this person, the translator, is not particularly knowledgeable about the evaluation framework or you know why we are conducting questions in the manner that we conducted. So sometimes he may have translated our questions in a different way. I don't really know because I don't speak Mongolian, but the answers that I heard was quite not really to the point. So we really have to get back to our local consultant to check to the translator what he meant. But also when there was so much confusion through the video and translation, we needed to get back to our local, our country office's ADB staff in the sector to really verify what the translator told us. And also, this is some contentious issue, but in our case, some of the meetings we had very high level with the Ministry of Finance or the central bank, and we had to have our own director management from IED as well. So in those kinds of very high level meeting, we asked if we could record our interviews because it's official anyway. And so, and we asked if they wanted our minutes to confirm what they have said later. So we asked them if they wanted our minutes. And we sent our questions prior to the meeting, and also we recorded and we made a brief minutes and we sent it to them if they wanted to check. So we did all these kinds of things just to make sure that something wrong doesn't happen afterwards. But maybe I'm not answering the question fully, but we did the best we could. Thank you.
No, that's very useful. And Joanne, I'm going to give you a choice of two questions. One is to follow up on what Tomo said and to see if you recorded your interviews and did you find that had effect on the level of candor. And then also a question that has come in from Stefan Wegner, and you can choose one or both to answer. Did you use local, well, maybe you didn't use local consultants, but this will be for the others. Did you use local consultants mainly for logistical help in country or to conduct the substantive case study? Did you need to cut back or simplify the questions? What did you lose out by using local consultants rather than interviewing stakeholders directly? And I will add, what did you lose out and what did you gain?
Okay, thanks. On recording the meetings, no, I didn't. And I think if you were on mission ordinarily, you know, I'm not sure to what extent it's common practice to record a meeting, right? I mean, you'd have to go in with your mobile phone and say, do you mind if I record this meeting? So no, I didn't record them. And I think I mean, people say it doesn't change the candor, but I just think it does. I mean, you want people to speak freely, right? If there's such a thing in Bangladesh, but yeah. So I didn't record, and I don't think we lost anything from that. On using local consultants and local think tanks and so on. I mean, we did the virtual mission to Bangladesh when I think the country was still in lockdown. So we did not use local consultants. you know, I'm not too sure what we've lost because we didn't do it. So we may have lost perhaps some more detailed sector work that could have been done. We could have sent people out to the field, but at the time, I felt we shouldn't be putting local consultants at risk because, you know, that's how it felt. I do think though that we really missed out on conversations that we would have with local think tanks, academia. You know, the kind of meetings that you sometimes have which haven't been arranged because usually somebody knows somebody who knows somebody. So yeah, the informality of it. I mean, it became much more formal than a normal trip to Dakar would have been. You know, there was no opportunity to go off and explore other things that perhaps you hadn't planned. You know, ADB invests quite a lot in railways in Bangladesh, and we wanted to use one of the weekends to take a trip on the train. You know, and that didn't happen, so we lost out in that respect.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I want to before we get to the last question for the panelists, I want to come back to all the online participants because that is a loss that Joanne talks about, the loss of those informal, serendipitous engagements that give you information that you hadn't even expected. Does anybody have ideas about what are ways using technology or other solutions that we might be able to make up for that loss of the informal transactions and information sources? I see Anastasia from IDB is online and would like to ask a couple of questions. So Anastasia, if you can make them brief, please unmute yourself and come in.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. So I wanted to ask questions to those who were kind of able to conduct interviews with local counterparts. And the question is basically, I think that given the extraordinarity of this situation, people will tend to talk more about what's going on now in the context of COVID, their difficulties, their problems. Like personally, I'm working on transparency and integrity evaluation now. And you know, all those issues which come up with the procurement, etc. So I'm afraid that people will tend to talk more about this rather than, you know, about what happened before. And on the other hand, this is kind of first question, if you had this sort of difficulties and how did you manage that? And the second question is related, and it's basically the balancing between what happened before and what's happening now to them, because to some evaluations, it's also important to take into account the specific context of COVID. So if kind of in your evaluation, you try to deal with that, whether it was necessary at all, and how did you balance that? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anastasia. That's an excellent question. And I'll open up to the panel, but also others who may have insights. But how do you find that right balance with addressing the initial question and taking into consideration COVID? Who would like to take that? Joanne, am I seeing you unmute? Yes, go ahead.
I'm happy to go first. You know, some people said don't start the meeting by asking about COVID because it can then dominate the meeting, and you know, and it can go on for too long, and you lose sight of what the meeting was about. So we tended in some meetings not to talk about it. Although I think, as Tomu and some others said earlier, it's important to recognise where people are. You know, that you know, they might be at home, or you know, I don't know, you know, sometimes we interview people on weekends as well. So it's important to be conscious of the condition that people are in. The only person on the team that really experienced this was the person looking at education, because, you know, the health ministry and the education ministry were really affected by COVID because they were having to change service delivery, in real time. So in the Ministry of Education, they were having to shift very quickly to online learning. And so it was very difficult, I think, to get meetings with people. And the other thing about the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education as well, I think because people were going to work, they also seemed to be suffering more from COVID in terms of infections. So I think so. Some ministries, by the nature of the service they provide, were more affected by COVID than others in terms of the impact that it had on their work and therefore their ability to engage with the evaluation.
Thank you. And that's a good point, of course, depending on the sector. I don't see how you could talk to someone in the health sector and not talk about COVID. So excellent point. Samson or Clement, what about you? How does COVID balance into evaluations that may not have started out having anything to do with this pandemic?
Yes, okay, Samson, go ahead, because my case, as I said, my experience happened in 2015, so before this current context of COVID. So we'll give the floor to Samson.
Okay, thank you, Clement. I think in our case, the bank support during the last 5 years incorporates a package of budget support where the bank support some reforms in public finance, debt management, and all those things. And in the current context, where the situation has changed, all those results, it was difficult for the stakeholders to make the distinction on what has been achieved through all those support up to now and how the current context will affect the result in terms of public finance management. So during the interviews, people tend usually to focus on what is happening now. So always during the interviews, we have to keep asking questions to understand what is the historical perspective. And then in our analysis, we will be able to describe the context before COVID and then present what is happening now. Otherwise, in our assessment, our assessment will not be fair and will not be balanced, given all the effort put the last 5 years to push for reforms in the countries. So we face that problem in the context of the governance component of the bank assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Samson. So I'm going to turn to our big question for the panel, which is looking backwards, right? So now you've completed these evaluations that we're discussing. How well did you think you did? How well do you think you answered the question? How different was it? But also thinking about your next evaluation. What did you learn from this experience? What would you do differently? And what advice do you have for our colleagues who may be embarking on an evaluation for which they cannot travel? And for participants, just a reminder, you can keep the questions coming and raise your hands if you also want to share an experience. So who would like to tackle this third question first? Who would like to be the first?
Yes, we'll be happy to start. Okay. I think that based on my experience, three main lessons can be learned. At the first is that we need to give more importance to secondary data during our evaluations. In my case, it was very, very important to collect the secondary data. So usually those secondary data is sometimes neglected by focusing more effort on the collection of primary data. This is the first lesson. The second one is we should always have a good understanding of the context in which we are going to conduct our evaluation in order to be more reactive, more flexible, to adapt our methodological approach to the evaluation to any change of context in the field. I think that this is the second one, because I have conducted several evaluation in fragile state, and I can tell you I know very well what I'm talking about. And lastly, I can say that another lesson is that if the evaluation is to take place in the country where there is the bank office, if you have the colleagues on the ground, it's very important to involve them early in the evaluation process, while showing them also how the evaluation can be useful for the day-to-day work. So based on that, you will be able to benefit from the full support. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanne, would you like, or Tomo, would one of you like to be next? Lessons for the future from your experience.
Okay, I'll go first, and I'm sure Tomo's got some too. There are so many lessons really, and so many different ways to approach this. I mean, you could say, okay, I mean, one of the things that happened with us, and will no doubt happen with others too, is that our missions are normally 2 weeks in length, right? And you apply for mission clearance, and you get your visas, and you get on the plane, and then you have your flight out of there, and it's 2 weeks, and it's quite intense. Whereas our mission went on for several weeks, because you no longer have that time constraint. But so if it was 2 weeks and you really did stick with that, you could say, okay, let's have 1 week with government, and let's have 1 week with non-government agencies. Let's have 1 week where we're trying to get out of the capital city, no matter how messy it is. Who can we meet with that is not government? Because our mission was very government-centered. And in a way, it was easy because, you know, a lot of government departments have the technology now, so we can have these, you know, we can have Zoom meetings with them. So you might want to, you know, knowing what we know now, challenge yourself a little bit more to open it up so that you are having more stakeholders involved in the process. And two more lessons. And so I was thinking, context is just everything. And how do you get that? And to some extent, you get it if you've got a large team, then you have to organize regular team meetings so that you're giving each other that feedback. Because you would normally get that on mission, right? Because you would all be in the same hotel. You'd probably meet for breakfast. You know, you'd probably go out for an evening meal together, and you're constantly talking about what you heard, what you learned, you know, and that is missing. So you have to, as well as organizing your meetings with government officials and other stakeholders, you have to have regular meetings with your team. And probably not every day. And you know that your team is likely to be spread all over the world, and everybody's in different time zones, so it's not easy. We did it once every 2 or 3 weeks, but I think with hindsight, it has to be more often, and you have to build it in. It has to be part of the discipline of the mission.
Thank you.
Okay, let me just go and compliment Joanne. So in my case, I think everybody does their evaluation or works differently. But if I have to do this again for other countries or something, in normal times, I would have a collection of project assessment sheets per sector, and I would have all these project level data, and then I would go to the country and immerse myself into the country and get the local sense of it. But in this case of COVID, where you cannot travel and stuff, and your time availability with your government and also with ADB staff, because ADB staff are also scattered in their home countries, and I don't really know how much availability they have on daily basis, because they're all across the globe. So I would try to do a lot of drafting further than just project assessment sheets before I do the interviews remotely. So I would have the draft almost ready. I mean, maybe some people are much more disciplined and they do it all the time, but so that I would really be able to prioritize my questions, because people are just busy these days. Just one. The other thing is that I would try to arrange like a interviews with ADB's resident mission local staff together or separately at the very outset of our mission, so that I could get as much sort of local information and updates from the local staff in the country offices as much as I can. In normal times, I try to do this while I'm traveling and after or in between government meetings, but I will try to efficientize my meeting schedules and absorb anything possible from my local colleagues from the operations. Thirdly, just normal, just do as much as you can on checking the web surfing on what the local media are saying about donor coordination or donor money for the COVID, or how much the sort of external financing has halted or delayed. Because in various countries, the level of media exposure is very different, but that was very helpful for Maldives, whereas Mongolia, there were very scarce information about how COVID is being supported by donor money. I couldn't get anything, so it's very different. And also, you would have to really check the Google map to check the local geographic conditions and where the cities locate. Because when you do these interviews remotely on video, the other side thinks that you know everything about the country and they really talk fast to you. So you have to be really prepared. Thank you.
Thank you. And the technology reminds me that there were some in IEG who used web scraping for an activity. So if any of those people are online, let us know. Before I turn to you, Samson, I understand that Karen would like to come in. I'd like to hear from you about using geospatial data in evaluations. Karen, can you come in?
Yes, Brenda. Indeed, we know of some other fellow evaluation departments that already have experience with using geospatial data for their evaluations. But for us, it's a bit new. We are now implementing it in an ongoing impact evaluation that we are doing of an energy connectivity project in Kenya, where we are comparing the treatment group with a control group. And here we are using geospatial data sets, specifically satellite data. On the one hand, we're using a population distribution mapping to get a household listing so that we can do the random selection of the households for treatment, control, and replacement. So this is one say satellite data set that we're using. And then we're using another satellite imagery data set with a higher resolution to capture the changes in electrification access in the groups. And the high resolution allows us to analyze, for example, the quality of housing, which is a key indicator of wealth. What some of the takeaways are from this experience is that it's satellite data is useful as a complementary data source, but it shouldn't be your only data source. It's just, let's say, an additional line of evidence or to validate other sources of data. And what we've also found is that they vary in resolution depending on whether they're publicly available or not. And so if you need high resolution data, it can be quite expensive. So it's got budget implications, and so you really need to be aware of that and incorporate it into your budget at the beginning of an evaluation. So we're just starting out using this geospatial data, but those are some of the early lessons that we're drawing. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. That's helpful. May I ask just a quick follow-up, which is, this is likely not expertise that you had in-house. So how did you identify the experts to work with you on analyzing this data, or did you do it in-house?
No, I think that they built it into the expression of interest and the request for proposals for the consulting firm that was hired to support this evaluation. It's true. I mean, if you're, it takes certain skills to be able to read satellite data, and so your evaluators would either need to be trained in how to read the maps and the images, or you would have to hire in that expertise. I think in this case it was part of the firm's assignment, and it was one of the selection criteria for the firm.
Thank you. So Samson, thanks for letting me take that diversion. Now I just want to turn to you for your final lessons from the experience. What advice do you have for us for the future based on your experience?
Thank you very much. I think for us, the evaluation, we are at reporting stage. So the evaluation is not completed yet. But however, we have many lessons that we can share at this point of time. I think for me, at the beginning, the buy-in of the stakeholders are very important for the process, because for us, we started with a lot of consultation with our country offices and the bank focal point in the government, understand what are the challenges, what technologies can be used, what are the information available, how people can go, which sites people can visit, which other they can't visit. All those information we collected from the beginning, and it was very helpful for us at the planning stage. So the buy-in from the stakeholders for us is very important. Among the team, I think the coordination is also very important, because given the workload, given the flow of the information, I think it's important to have a kind of collaborative platform completed by regular meetings, as Joanne suggested. This helps to quickly identify the challenges and adjust it going forward. In terms of challenges for data collection, I think where we mostly face challenge is for the primary data, and I think for that it's important that from the beginning to spend more time for the preparatory work, the doc review, identify all the secondary data available and all those things. But for the primary data, the challenge is still there. For us, we select a sample, but it was difficult for us to reach out to all the people that we wanted to the final beneficiaries that we wanted to talk to. And this happened particularly in the agriculture sector, where one of the bank assistants went to the cooperatives, and it was difficult for us to assess the effectiveness of that component. And it's important in the process that we find the trade-off in terms of strength of the methodological approach and the additional findings that we may have. It's important that we clearly state it in the report, and at one point of time, we can't have everything that we can get in normal situations. So at certain point of time, we have to decide and find the right balance in terms of what we wanted to achieve and what is available.
Yes.
The context.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I really appreciate your taking the time to share your experiences with us. I'm going to open it up for one more round of questions if anyone has a question or comment they want to make. And then I'll be turning it over to Jose Carbajo for some closing remarks. But I just want to let colleagues know from IDB, ADB, and African Development Bank that if you would like to, if you wouldn't mind sending email to Hema Nair, which is HNAIR@worldbank.org, and Bahar will put it in the chat in that way that we can follow up with the survey on this experience. We are doing a series of knowledge sharing experiences with evaluators around the world. We're so happy that you were able to join us for this one. And so we want to make sure that we're getting them right. So send email to Hema so that we can send that survey to you. But before I turn it over to Jose for concluding remarks, does anybody have a final question or comment that they would like to make? Okay, Jose, over to you.
Thank you very much, Brenda, and thank you everybody for participating. Thank you, Clement, Samson, Karen, Tomo, Joan, and all the people who have asked questions. I think it has been a very rich exchange. I don't plan to summarize, but there are a few items that have come across all the discussions and the questions that are worth noticing. Just as a concluding remarks, I mean, clearly the lessons that we all have learned from early experiences is that there is a rich variety of experiences, circumstances that we need to take into account. Timing is of the essence. A strategy for remote data collection. One of you were emphasizing the agility of learning by doing rather than planning in these early stages. And two topics that have been cut across all the issues tabled by Brenda are the need to know local conditions, including the availability and the support from resident office staff, because they differ across countries, but also the availability and quality of the local consultants. So these are things that cut across and are very important. I also heard a few tips to consider in future, also depending on specific circumstances. One is the flexibility with timing. You have to be on your tiptoes. Again, availability of local consultant came up here. The notion that it is better to prioritize the interviews and the information gathering, and the importance of coordination, not just internally, but also with your team. I mean, this point that Joan made regarding, the discipline of keeping your team informed, because you have to compensate for the lack of normal circumstances where you will exchange notes almost on a daily basis. And I also want to echo the point made about, the lack of color and texture from not being able to liaise with the locals. Normally when we set up missions, as you know, in a week, you have all meetings organized between Monday and Wednesday, but then you leave Thursday and Friday kind of free because you know that some other suggestions are going to come up, and perhaps this agility and this flexibility is not available in current circumstances. I also heard about the need to adapt as much as possible to collect data, because the usual sources of information are not available, and the use of secondary data information. That is to say, the importance of alternative sources. Then there are, before I go into to summarize the lessons, there are 3 items where I didn't hear too much of an echo among the audience, and they were raising questions. So there are 3 items, as it were, that we need to consider for the future. One is the use of technological solutions. I mean, there was a mention at the end of the discussion about GPS and how it is important, but it's not the only source. Nonetheless, there wasn't much of a reaction in the audience when the question was put on the table. The other one is how to address this lack of informality. that is very rich and helpful in identifying other stakeholders. And the other one is in current circumstances and predicting that COVID is going to stay here for a while. How do we balance the scoping of the questions and the interaction with the stakeholders so that COVID doesn't sort of dominate everything? I think those three, lack of informality, the balancing of the questions before and after COVID, so to speak, and the scope for the use of technological solutions are three items that I was paying attention, and there wasn't too much of an echo. So these are things for the future. And I will finish with, I think it has been very rich exchange, and there has been quite a number of interesting lessons. As I was saying before, the use of secondary data, the agility to be flexible and reactive, and that methods and the involvement of the RO staff. You need to challenge yourself to have access not to the normal stakeholders, but other ones. And one of you was even given a specific tip as to whether you should do more drafting early than usual. And Karen was emphasizing, I think I mentioned already, the use of geospatial data for evaluations, but reminding us that satellite data is a useful source, but just one, and it depends very much on, again, on circumstances and the quality of the resolution for that data to be useful. And last but not least, Samson was just now reminding us also the importance of the buy-in from all stakeholders, whether government or civil society. And once again, to reiterate the need to coordinate among all the parties involved in the evaluation to identify early challenges and propose solutions. So, I mean, I'm reading out of my notes, the notes that I took. One point that I forgot, and I have an anecdote to share, the importance of the quality of translation. This is terribly important because I remember the anecdote that I had when I was country economist for Belarus in the mid-90s, working at the EBRD chief economist office. I remember that the translator that I was using at one point started arguing with the interviewee because he wasn't in agreement with the answers that the interviewee was giving. So you can imagine, how was I going to take as valid the answers that this translator will give me afterwards. So let's not forget about the quality of translation, which again is linked to the quality of and availability of local consultants. I will stop here, but just as concluding remarks, very much agree with Brenda that these series are extremely useful. This is the way in which we exchange notes and we communicate our experiences. And again, it's part of this coordination and learning that we are trying to foster through these networks. Thank you very much, all of you, for your feedback. Over to you, Brenda.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you for those closing remarks. And, one of the things we're doing from these knowledge sharing sessions is capturing the lessons shared so that everyone, even people who don't participate, can have access to that. So your summing up is a great start for us to create the knowledge note from this session. And I do think you raised some really interesting key questions that we have yet to answer. So we'll be looking at getting experiences from that. We have recorded this session and we will share it with all of our colleagues so that if they want to share it with others, they can. And we will also share the knowledge notes. So again, if you're not in IEG, be sure to send email to Heminair and she'll get that to you. And so I want to thank our colleagues from the African Development Bank and the Asian Development Bank, Joanne, Tomo, Samson, Clement. Thank you so much for being willing to share your experiences with us. I really appreciate it. I also want to thank Karen for also sharing her experiences, and Jose for being willing to give us those concluding remarks. That's it. We will look forward to the next knowledge sharing session. And I see we have staff from IDB, so we may be in touch to learn from you as well. Everybody, I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thanks, Brenda.
Thanks very much, colleagues.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.